It is a hunting day, and the target is the son of General Kim Wong-bong. But why are the Empire's soldiers hunting the son of their own boss? Because the boy was born without mana in a world where everyone has magic. For a family obsessed with power, having such a weak son was a complete disgrace, so his own father ordered him to be eliminated. Lieutenant Jung was assigned to fight the boy, but the child couldn't even harm a fly. So Jung simply ran his sword through his stomach and threw him off a cliff, a fall so high that even Deadpool wouldn't survive. At night, the soldiers went to the site to check if he had really kicked the bucket. After hours of searching, they finally found the boy, and the scene left everyone stunned because the child had been thrown off a cliff the size of Everest with a huge hole in his stomach. And yet he was sitting there, perfectly calm. What? Out of nowhere, he began to emit a green energy. One of the soldiers got scared and lunged at him, but the boy saw the attack coming, dodged it, and threw a punch, leaving the entire squad in shock. When the others drew their swords, the boy pulled 3 coins from his pocket and threw them with such force that they pierced 3 skulls at once. The rest of the squad went for it, but the boy who had been useless before was tearing through the elite troops. The last one standing pulled out his gun and shot at his blind spot. The boy simply dodged the bullet and even called him slow. He grabbed the lieutenant by the neck and, with a smile on his face, finished off the last enemy without receiving a single scratch. But what happened to this boy? How did he fall off that cliff without magic and suddenly become Broly? This is Kim Tae-ju, and what the soldiers didn't know is that during the fall, his mind was taken to another world where he stumbled upon an old man. That man was Tang Gunhak, the supreme venom demon, a master so insane that he conquered his world by crushing everyone. When their minds connected, they shared their memories and discovered they were the same person in parallel universes, although their lives were quite different. The old man became the most OP guy in his world, while the boy was the failure of his family and ended up murdered. So Tang transmitted all his knowledge of martial arts and the secret of Kai, and sent the boy back to his body, ready to be the strongest in his own universe. When Tae-ju woke up, the first thing he did was grab a poisonous plant and swallow it. He meditated and transformed the poison into pure energy, focusing on becoming the Tang Gunhak of his world. That's why when the soldiers found him, he was sitting meditating, emanating green energy. After defeating all the soldiers, he had only one mission in mind: eliminate everyone who wanted him dead. One of the squads returned to the base and told the general that they found the lieutenant's troop completely annihilated and no trace of the boy's body. His father was already losing patience, but since in this world anyone without mana dies, poisoned by the air itself, he was sure the boy would end up dying anyway. But the general has no idea what's coming. Kill that boy. Kill that boy. A few days later, in the magical beast border area of Mount Jiri, the protagonist was admiring the landscape. From where he stood, Gyuri was completely visible. When asked if it was his first time seeing that view, the young man confirmed he was new there. The mustached man realized the young man probably didn't know much about his city. In 2026, Gyuri was just a small city in Korea until it joined the empire. Mount Jiri was a place full of monsters that desperately needed to be exterminated. That's why the emperor had turned Gyuri into a free city. This gave it many advantages, such as low taxes on magical beast products and the permissiveness of crime. By depriving the city of laws, it quickly enriched itself with awakeners who flocked in to subdue the magical beasts. And while the man kept rambling on about all this, our hero asked him to get to the point. In the end, the boss warned the protagonist about the large number of criminals flooding their lawless city. Tae-ju considered the man quite talkative, but he liked him as a person and enjoyed his advice. A few days ago, Tae-ju had survived an assassination attempt. After that, he cut off all his contacts after his discharge and began looking for a place where he could gain power. And after thinking it over a bit, the free city turned out to be the perfect place. After all, since the empire doesn't have much control over the city, it would be hard for his family to find out his whereabouts. To make things better, it was full of all kinds of poisonous items that would be very useful in his training. Tae-ju was not yet familiar with martial arts. By some miracle, the hero who was on the brink of death had encountered his counterpart in the world of martial arts, known as the Supreme Venom Demon. Our hero found it quite ironic that the woman who wanted to kill him ended up doing him a great favor instead. For now, Tae-ju, working as a porter in the mountains, decided to quietly acquire the strength and funds needed to become completely independent. At that moment, the boss asked his opinion on who was the strongest in the group. The old man pointed to the surprisingly young Lee Han-yeol, who was a regular rank awakener. As a regular rank awakener, she would be one level above the first lieutenant our hero killed. However, for some reason, the young woman was acting strangely. Suddenly, the Awakena lost consciousness, and just like that, she collapsed to the ground after being bitten by a mutant three-striped mosquito, leaving everyone in panic. As for Tiju, he didn't understand why this was such a big problem. At that moment, someone decided to take charge of the situation. The redhead with a magic staff channeled all her power and launched a huge fireball spell. And a powerful explosion occurred, putting an end to the mosquito's terror. When asked the reason for this panic, the boss explained that this insect had the power to temporarily disappear mana. Some Awakeners even fainted from the bite, and it was natural for everyone to panic, since countless groups had met their end because of a single mosquito. In the memories of his martial artist alter ego, the protagonist began to recall a poison that was quite similar to the mosquito's bite. For that reason, the hero decided to take the opportunity to examine the girl using a venom spiritual art, and what he discovered left him particularly intrigued. One of the hunters began to tremble, since this area should be mosquito-free. For that reason, he went to the team leader and stated that it would be better to retreat, with which the leader agreed. Only then did something begin to move in the tall grass. The leader was startled by this. For that reason, he asked his group to prepare for battle. However, it turned out to be just a long-tailed rabbit, a creature at the bottom of the food chain and a good guinea pig since it reproduces at an incredibly high rate. Seeing this, the whole team felt relieved. They quickly assumed they had been scared for nothing. But what they didn't know was that this was far from a false alarm. Before anyone could realize it, the team leader and the one next to him were quickly decapitated, and so the group lost 2 men. Now the humans were being attacked by orcs' ferocious beasts that made their presence known with powerful roars. Seeing this, the mage decided to buy time for her group by distracting the monsters. The boss turned to the protagonist. Tiju urged him not to wait for him, as he was going to stay there. The old man tried to argue that there was nothing people like them could do there, but Tiju was determined to lend a hand. And so, the boss received the young swordswoman who had fainted. Tiju told him to start running and explained that he was only going to provide small help. Having said that, the man began to flee while urging his friend to survive. Shortly after, our hero noticed that the monster's movements were strangely synchronized. Meanwhile, the mage was hurling her skills left and right to take care of the orcs. Only then did she realize that one of them was heading toward Tiju. Seeing this, he planted his foot firmly on the ground and decided to stop the creature immediately. With a single fireball, the orc was eliminated. Tiju covered his nose, disgusted by the smell of burnt flesh. Only then did he notice something shocking. Tiju shouted at the lady to duck, and before she could even realize it, a blade was thrown toward her neck from behind. Meanwhile, in the heavenly realm, beside a tranquil lake radiating serenity, the supreme venom demon, who had entered this realm a month ago, began to think about how he would still have been trapped in his old realm if it hadn't been for our hero. Due to the memory bond, the old man had acquired the knowledge present on planet Earth. This allowed him to achieve enlightenment, and with it, his goal of reaching a higher plane of existence was finally fulfilled. Still, it was his fault for not knowing better, since in the end, this heavenly realm turned out to be an elegant madhouse. It was truly shocking to see it full of all kinds of crazy people. And in the eyes of the venom demon, sect founders and legendary masters were no different. Seeing that everyone lacked manners, the old man realized it had been a stupid idea to waste his life trying to achieve enlightenment. Still, he couldn't deny that sharing his soul with his younger self had been a rather pleasant experience. That's why the demon began to wonder how his successor was doing. They were the same person, but due to their environments, one became a feared and respected master. As for the other, he was labeled a reject, so the old man hoped his skills could help improve his situation. To surpass the strongest in his world, Tiju needed to reach the 7th star of his new venom martial art. The old man began to fantasize about the moment when he and his younger self would meet, and about what he could teach him. But while he was lost in thought, something was suddenly thrown at him. It was none other than the immortal of the sword, who decided to bother the venom demon for daring to mock swordsmanship despite being a dagger thrower. Having said that, the one who had given up enlightenment lunged at the other old man with his knives in hand. Meanwhile, on Earth, while the orcs were being burned to a crisp, the lady noticed something alarming. Still, she didn't have enough time to react to the blade, and seeing her incompetence, the protagonist had no choice but to act, so he decided to take control of the situation. He began by knocking her unconscious. Tiju then lunged forward. He decided to resort to the new art skill he had learned. Thus, a storm of coins rained down on the battlefield as he used the flying dagger art dagger explosion. The enormous orcs were quickly overwhelmed by the fast and lethal coins, and so the projectiles bounced off their heads. And so, the martial artist finally landed on the ground. It was a pleasant surprise for him to see that it only took one hit to take care of an entire orc. Ju began to wonder what to do with the mage he had accidentally knocked out. On the other hand, he couldn't afford to let it become public that someone without a mark had eliminated a group of weak orcs, as that would put many eyes on him, including his father's. For that reason, he decided to flee the area immediately. Ju had to think about how the meeting with the old man had changed his life, since a mana reject would normally never worry about such things. The protagonist decided not to leave any trace of himself. It was quite annoying having to clean up after using his throwing skills, since the weapons had to be carefully collected, and the cost of projectiles was always high. While the hero began to think about how he would acquire a recovery skill after reaching the 7th star, he realized he was missing a coin and started searching everywhere for it. After a while, he found it stuck in a tree, but as he reached out to grab it, he noticed an insect flying nearby. Ju decided to act quickly, so he swiftly caught the mosquito in the palm of his hand. Seeing that this was not an area where mutant three-striped mosquitoes appeared, it was safe to say that this was the same insect that had bitten the professional awakener. Ju then gently placed the insect in the palm of his hand. The venom of this creature temporarily disperses internal energy and alters the flow of mana within awakeners. Our hero immediately compared it to the energy-dispersing venom of Murim. However, on Earth, humans had to use protective gear, since, unlike Murim, they didn't have the antidote for this venom, making it quite dangerous. Discovering the composition of the venom would allow our hero to create an antidote using the knowledge he had acquired from the old man. Although, on the other hand, he would have to locate herbs in his world similar to those in the old master's world. So Ju decided to do the only logical thing and ate the insect he had in his hand. The young man quickly swallowed the mosquito, ingesting it without issue. His last snack made him realize that the two venoms were identical, meaning that by finding the right ingredients, he could create a cure that would make him rich. Having said that, our protagonist decided to test this upon returning home. Only then was he drawn by an intriguing sound. Ju then was startled by what he saw. He was now face to face with an elite orc that shouldn't have appeared in this area, and by its appearance the monster was thirsting for blood. While the monster shouted that it wanted to exterminate humans, the protagonist was perplexed by its size, as well as its ability to speak. In any case, elite monsters could be considered the awakened of magical beasts. To make matters worse, no orc, let alone an elite one, should appear in this area, which meant something was happening on the mountain. Having said that, the orc began to brandish its weapon. Ju dodged immediately. The power of the blow caused great destruction. The old man was amazed by such firepower and stated that it was comparable to that of an expert rank monster. There was a high chance that none of his coins could pierce the monster's skin. Still, he decided to try. Ju immediately used his flying dagger art, Quick Strike. This allowed him to launch 3 coins at high speed toward the monster. His projectiles hit the target only to stop instantly. Such a result was not surprising. The martial artist's most powerful hidden weapon attack had no effect on the monster, and since his area of effect technique would further disperse the force, he began to think that the blood seal venom palm would be the best option. At that moment, the creature let out a fierce roar. It was at that instant that Ju realized he was hesitating. He was even sure that his past self would be ashamed of him if he found out he was doubting himself at the start of the fight. Ju realized he had become proud after easily defeating the orc pack. No matter how fearsome the obstacle in front of him, he would keep trying until he succeeded. After all, this was the path of the supreme venom demon, and so, when the venom palm was unleashed, the elite monster braced itself to block the attack. Having said that, its huge steel axe clashed against our hero's bare palm. Ju managed to push himself to the limit, and just like that, a great explosion occurred. At the end of the clash, the giant axe was damaged, but only one of the fighters had his knees on the ground. Ju couldn't even scratch the orc. Seeing this, he decided to keep attacking until it fell. At that moment, a swift blade was drawn. Suddenly, the elite orc suffered 1,000,000 cuts. The human was confused. Even the monster itself didn't realize what had just happened. And as the orc shattered into pieces, Ju realized that his killer must be a master rank awakener, and that if it weren't for the elite, he would have fled the place long ago. So he began to think of an excuse to give his savior. At that moment, Ju was asked if he was the orc's killer. The man stated that since the hero had no marks, He was a pathetic non-awakened who shouldn't have been able to defeat the monsters. Tiju didn't know what to say in the face of those cold eyes. Permanent Committee member Lee Young-hak, also known as the Vigilante Captain, who was the master of the Nagaten Guild, demanded answers. Tiju realized that such presence, arrogance, and power could only belong to someone important, meaning he had to choose his words carefully. However, when he began to speak, he was quickly joined by the boss, but the man wasn't worried about him. He only cared about the luggage, which, according to who was carrying it, seemed to be safe. And as he pointed out how he had been saved by someone, the bearded man turned to see who it was. The porter immediately recognized Lee Young-hak, who ordered his newly arrived forces to call a cleanup team. The Free City answered to an autonomous committee instead of the emperor, and the vigilante captain was a voting member of the committee. He was also the master of the Nagaten Guild, in charge of security, as well as being a master rank awakened. And while the boss pointed out that all porters paid his guild for protection, the guild master ordered him to shut up. The bearded man apologized for being so talkative and encouraged his companion to thank his savior, which he did immediately. Lee Young-hak asked the young man if he really had nothing to do with the orc massacre, considering that he was a Tiju confirmed it, and stated that he had been left alone with the elite monster after the mage who annihilated the orcs fainted from mana exhaustion. Having said that, the guard captain's men urged him to get moving, as they had secured the survivors and called the cleanup team. Lee Young-hak decided to move quickly, although he seemed to have more to say. He advised the newcomer to his city to never cross him on a bad day or cause trouble. Then he left laughing like a maniac and assured our protagonist that he wouldn't show him the same mercy as today. Once the committee member left, the old boss felt relieved, so he firmly asked his colleague to never anger the man who could make his life impossible in this city. Tiju tried to explain that Lee Young-hak didn't seem so bad, only to learn that he was a corrupt officer who enjoyed bribes and overlooked some crimes. In fact, all his patrols were nothing but cover-ups, and if the situation hadn't been urgent, he wouldn't have asked for help given that masters were basically walking nuclear bombs. The new porter was advised to avoid them and take his luggage down the mountain immediately. Tiju was sure he would have been in a tight spot if the vigilante captain hadn't intervened. Then he quickly realized that he had wasted an entire month after sharing his soul, and that he had become arrogant after killing some awakened using skills he had obtained easily. Tiju, as he was, wouldn't even dare to look at his former self. From that day on, he decided to take things more seriously and swore to become powerful. The Free City of Gyuri had almost perfect urban infrastructure. However, it was cruelly lacking in hospitals, since no good doctor would dare set foot in such a dangerous place. Most of the medical assistants here were actually a bunch of quacks fleeing the law. For that reason, drugstores and pharmacies became incredibly abundant in the Free City. For that reason, pharmacists had the power to and dispense medications approved by the government or the autonomous committee. Some pharmacists even made a fortune from this, as they were much more reliable than any shady hospital. For that reason, the protagonist decided to sell his cure for the mutant three-striped mosquito. The last month was exhausting for him, as he spent his days working as a porter, his free time collecting herbs, and his nights training martial arts. To make matters worse, he was forced to reach the 3rd star in his martial arts, seeing how delicate the preparation of the antidote was. But thanks to that, he gained power, which means he would no longer be easily defeated, and if everything goes well, Tiju Kim might manage to make a good fortune. Upon entering the store, the customer was greeted at the pharmacy box. While the counter worker offered him numerous products, our hero revealed that he was there to see the owner. This took the lady by surprise. Then Tiju revealed that he was a seller and not a buyer. The man in the back heard all this. Then he took a deep breath. Bak Hong Pio, who was also the director of his own orphanage, then introduced himself as the CEO of this pharmacy. Tiju immediately greeted him and explained that he was there to sell some of his homemade medicines. The old man was already tired of this, as every day a new scammer knocked on his door. For that reason, he quickly rejected the offer and told the newcomer to the city that if he wanted to earn something, he should go to the job market. However, as soon as Tiju mentioned that it was an antidote for mosquitoes, the owner became intrigued. He even thought he had misheard. The protagonist clarified that this was a cure for the mutant three-striped mosquito. Thus, he managed to spark Hong Pio's interest. He clarified that it was an oral medication that could be taken in advance. And when the young man pointed out that its effects lasted about 10 hours, the old owner became especially interested. He was annoyed by the fact that the young man in front of him didn't even make an effort to make his scam seem credible. The medicine maker gave them 2 more bottles. He handed them his card and asked them to contact him if they changed their minds after testing them. His deadline was midnight. T-Ju left the place explaining that he would take his products to someone else if they didn't contact him by then. At that moment, everyone in the store was speechless. They all saw him as some kind of madman. At that moment, the customer took the bottle with interest. That was Park Jinsu, the leader of his own raid team, a regular customer of the store and a medicine enthusiast who asked the owner if that was plausible. Hong Pio looked at him at first with confusion. He explained that he couldn't tell him immediately. According to him, everything would be clear once the medicine was tested. Hong Pio didn't expect much, since even the best companies in the empire hadn't managed to develop this cure, but the seller's confidence intrigued him. Then the lady urged the customer to leave the bottle, but he argued that they still needed to test it. The old owner turned around, horrified. He began to shout at his tall, regular customer for carelessly consuming a suspicious medicine that hadn't even been tested. However, after ingesting it, Jinsu declared that the bottle simply contained water. The owner was stunned. Since the regular customer had a lot of experience with potions, the owner asked him if he felt any effect from the medicine he had in his hand. Still, Jinsu stated once again, disappointed, that he felt nothing, meaning it was just plain water. Having said that, he called the hero a scammer and advised the old man to discard the remaining bottles. Still, Hong Pio still had his doubts that the protagonist was just one of his usual daily scammers. Having said that, the regular customer finished his shopping marathon. He and his group were going to catch frogs, and his little drug test had made him late for the meeting. Despite all these products being quite expensive, the man decided to pay everything in cash. With his shopping done, the regular customer said goodbye to the old owner. Hong Pio urged them to be careful, thinking about how T-Ju was obviously a scammer, since no one could ever create an antidote for mosquito venom. Later that day, a fierce battle broke out. The white beasts were wreaking havoc everywhere. At that moment, the shield reinforcement was activated. Jinsu was able to protect himself from the attack of the leaf-toothed martens, which shouldn't have appeared in this area. At that moment, his ally firmly grasped her sword and went straight for the deadly attack. She told the team leader that they had to flee immediately. Seeing that they now had a clear path, the warrior revealed that she had been bitten by a mosquito, and that paralysis would soon take effect. His ally asked him to hold on a little longer, since they would only be safe once she took care of the last marten she was facing. Only then did she notice something horrifying. Mutant mosquitoes had appeared. If Jinsu suffered more bites, he would be overwhelmed by the venom and fall victim to paralysis. If he collapsed to the ground, the whole team would be at the mercy of the wild. He began to fear that he had really been poisoned, as his shield weakened, wondering what he had done wrong if he had taken precautions regarding this insect-infested area. The whole group was caught off guard by the leaf-toothed martens, which appeared out of nowhere within the territory of the mutant frogs. This surprise attack immediately destroyed the ant-insect suits of the entire group. The team leader began to blame himself for this, as his carelessness and panic had led to him being hit. At first, the group members who were bitten by the insects decided to retreat immediately. However, for some reason, the mammals blocked their escape route, leaving them no choice but to fight. Jinsu only needed a little more power to defeat the last marten and survive. At that moment, the swordsman warned him of an imminent attack. Only then did the team leader notice something terrifying. The monster had launched a powerful attack. His blade managed to pierce his shield, and so the barrier shattered. However, for some reason, even though his skill was destroyed, Jinsu did not lose strength or mana. It was at that moment that he realized what was happening. The antidote he had consumed in the store was, in fact, not a scam. Realizing this, he decided to throw himself back into battle. He firmly gripped his sword. The team leader began to think that, if the antidote really worked, victory was not impossible. Later that night, someone hurriedly entered the old owner's pharmacy. Jinsu rushed to speak with the owner. He asked about the price of the mosquito antidote and demanded to buy the entire stock. Sometime later in the Free City market, a leaf-toothed marten, said to be incredibly good for stamina, was selling for 5 million won. A bit further on, someone was selling a custom magical crustacean beast armor for 50 million won. The boy, who grew up in the border city of Baiyou, had never set foot in such a large market and found it quite lively. T-Ju had made the right decision by taking a day off. To create the mosquito antidote, he needed to reach the 3rd star. The medicine required precise control of internal energy to extract what was needed from medicinal and poisonous herbs. However, because the hero had overworked himself, His venom essence had become saturated, meaning he needed some time to digest all the poison. Leaving that aside, he began to recall a meeting at a cafe. Hong Pio had demanded to sign a contract to buy each bottle of the antidote. Apparently, the homemade medicine turned out to be effective. The old owner confirmed this and explained how it would revolutionize the mountain house, before apologizing for having called the hero a crazy charlatan. Hong Pio then downplayed this and asked how many bottles the young man had produced. Upon learning that there were 60,000 in stock, the old man asked what would happen once they ran out. Then Tiju revealed that he would simply make more. With that, they handed him a contract where the official production cost was set at 10,000 won, so they could sell them for 50,000 won, including everything else. Seeing that production only cost him 100 won per bottle, Tiju was quite satisfied and noted that the stock would sell for 3 billion won. Upon learning that the tax was only 10%, he couldn't be more pleased with the lawless city. Tiju then decided to change the deal and sell exclusively to Beek Pharmacy, with a 30% discount for a year. But the old man claimed that was too much, so the hero pointed out that the old man was the director of an orphanage. He added that, according to everyone, the old owner was practically a father to all the orphans in the city. Since the pharmacy funded the orphanage, Tiju declared that this was his way of helping in exchange for a workshop to manufacture the cure. Hong Pio, overwhelmed by such kindness, assured the hero that he had the perfect place for him, having said that the deal was finally sealed. After securing the contract and a juicy payment, the hero decided to head down to the city's famous market in search of some gear. He began searching everywhere for something decent. Only then did someone ask him if he wanted a weapon. When asked if they were talking to him, the man confirmed, assuring that his shop was the best in the city. The bald, muscular giant, posing like in JoJo, even offered our hero a special discount upon seeing how handsome he was. Tiju felt repulsed and said he didn't want to buy anything. Grabbing him by the shoulder, the blacksmith insisted that the fresh meat visit his lonely workshop. The blacksmith seemed unremarkable and, at most, should be an acceptable craftsman, but still, he easily pushed someone who had reached the 3rd star in martial arts. Therefore, he might well be a hidden master craftsman. Later in the shop, after glancing at the shields, swords, hammers, and daggers, the hero was asked his opinion on the collection. Seeing how impressed he was, the blacksmith stated once again that he was the best in the entire city. At that moment, the poisoned martial artist decided to use his powers. The blacksmith kept his word since, contrary to what his appearance suggested, his products were flawless. Seeing this, he decided to place an order for 100 of the weapons drawn on the paper. Looking at the willow leaf-shaped flying daggers, the blacksmith was intrigued by their small size and asked if they were for personal use. Baldy then explained that for the daggers to be efficient, they had to be made of mana steel. Tiju asked if he could complete his order. The man confirmed, but explained that he couldn't do it immediately as he lacked materials. After careful calculation and adding the discount for the customer's beauty, the blacksmith demanded 250 million won as the total price, with a 10% deposit. Such a high cost for 100 single-use weapons did not surprise the hero, who decided to pay the full price up front. Having said that, the blacksmith promised to send the first sample to the hero once finished, before saying goodbye to him. Having resolved the issue of his weapons, the protagonist now needed to find armor. Seeing that he needed clothes with enough pockets to carry all his hidden knives, he thought he needed a robe like the old masters. But imagining it, he realized he would only look ridiculous and decided to go for a more modern outfit. However, just as he began to wonder what kind of outfit he should get, someone suddenly approached him. Tiju was intrigued. The lady with fox ears handed him a flyer, stating that the new collection of Flame Boutique had just come out, and they currently had coats on display. Tiju immediately realized that a leather coat would be the perfect substitute for a long robe. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, as both explored the streets, the castle finally came into view. The long-haired girl found it quite ridiculous that there was a wall around the city in the current era. Her short-haired friend agreed, explaining that this was an exclusive place for important people that could only be reached by boat. The woman talking about the behavior of the upper class in this city was Jung Yong-hee, heiress of the Baekdu group, and a cadet at the military academy. The person next to her found her quite intimidating and asked why she had come all the way to this city just for a fox fur coat. It was revealed that the coat was made from the fur of rare Siberian solution foxes, which gave it excellent defense and made it ideal for both winter and summer. Hearing this, her orange-haired companion stated that the coat seemed worth wasting a day off for. Although it was revealed that her grandfather, the president, had lent her a black card, Yong-Yong-hee refused, claiming she was going to use her own money. At that moment, the train finally stopped at the Gyuri market, and passengers finally exited the vehicle. The military academy cadet told Secretary Kim that they should not waste time and should go directly to the boutique. Meanwhile, back with our hero, he decided it would be better to have a leather coat instead of a robe. Later, upon entering the boutique, Tae-ju explained that he had been handed a flyer outside. The secretary began to be cautious, thinking that the man was also after the coat. At that moment, the shop owner welcomed him to Flame Boutique, only to realize he seemed quite familiar. Tae-ju didn't recognize the woman in front of him, but she immediately recognized him as a porter. The lady clarified that they had been in the same group a month ago during the orc attack. Finally remembering the mage, the protagonist asked her reason for being there. The lady explained that this boutique was her main job, and acting as a mage was just a way to earn extra money, before saying that she had been looking for him everywhere. Hearing this, Tae-ju decided to leave immediately, since he had previously given her credit for killing the orcs to stay out of the spotlight. However, Tae-ju was not fully prepared to face the truth once the lady woke up, so he decided to avoid her, fearing she might ask him too many questions. However, just as he was about to leave, he was suddenly stopped. The mage simply wanted to know if the porter was really the one who had saved her. When Nagaden asked if she had fainted after exhausting her mana, she decided to play along, because her savior obviously had some secrets to keep. Tae-ju tried to deny the accusations, but the lady began to tremble. She thanked him with all her heart, because thanks to him, she was able to recover the bodies of her team leader and her boyfriend. As she burst into tears, the hero didn't know how to handle the situation. It couldn't be denied that he had ended up saving her life, but his main purpose, which was to test his skills, could be considered selfish. For that reason, he felt unworthy of the mage's gratitude. At that moment, the secretary began shouting at the seller for making her lady wait. The mage immediately apologized, suddenly dropping to her knees. Out of nowhere, the mage firmly apologized to the lady, claiming that she could no longer sell her the coat. Tae-ju was especially confused. The secretary erupted in anger and began shouting at her, complaining that after going through all kinds of trouble and a long journey, they were now being denied the sale at the moment of payment. The mage apologized once again and stated that she really wanted to sell them the most valuable item in her shop, but that she had found a better use for it. Even when she promised compensation for both the lady and the secretary, the cadet had already heard enough. With that, she stopped the secretary from continuing to shout. The lady decided to go on her way. As the secretary yelled about how irritating all this was, the important lady stated that it wasn't that big a deal. As the two left the shop, Tae-ju began to worry that he had caused unnecessary trouble. When the mage stated that she was the one who should apologize, Tae-ju asked her why she had decided to keep the coat. Hearing this, the lady pointed out that surely people always told him how bad he was at reading others. After all, he still didn't realize what was happening. The mage wanted to give him the expensive coat. Tae-ju found it hard to understand. The mage simply wanted to return the favor of saving her life by giving him the silver fox leather coat. The hero immediately refused, claiming that he had acted selfishly back then and that saving her was not his main purpose. But the lady explained that she didn't care about his intentions, since at the end of the day, he had still saved her life. She stated that if he wanted to repay her, he should save more people so that no one died in vain, as happened to her boyfriend. It was the first time anyone had shown our hero such gratitude. He had lived his entire life surrounded by bad people. However, due to the current situation, he found himself overwhelmed by a strange feeling. Still, Tae-ju did not dislike that emotion at all, and so in the end he accepted the gift with gratitude. The mage was extremely happy about this and ran to take his measurements. Meanwhile, in the realm of lost souls, the old man was quite bored. The immortal of the sword, Dong Bin Sonnen, had nothing to do in this infinite retirement home. In his eyes, everyone dressed, acted, and looked exactly the same. Only one person was different from the rest. Despite also being from Murim, the supreme venom demon was not like the others. After changing his hairstyle and using clothes from another world, he either succumbed to the madness of this realm, or he had always been mad. The immortal of the sword was so bored alone that he decided to ask the man to teach him how to make that kind of outfit. And with that, he finally made a decision. To persuade the venom demon, he decided to give him a special gift, a fruit known as the heavenly peach of this realm. A little later, in the old owner's orphanage, in one of the lowest underground floors, something shady was happening behind a sealed door. After much effort, Tae-ju obtained positive results. At that moment, he received a call. It was none other than the old man who had just found out that the manufacturing of the antidote was finished. Hong Pio was delighted with this, since his shelves were almost empty, which surprised the protagonist greatly. After the news of the new mosquito-repellent medicine became public, the shop filled with all kinds of adventurers. To top it off, some people, like the first product tester, were buying it in bulk. Tiju asked the owner to tell everyone that more bottles were on the way, and that each person could only buy a maximum of 2 bottles. The old man agreed, but expressed his concern that counterfeit medicines might soon appear. Still, our hero didn't care. According to him, if they copied them, they just needed to create a new product, knowing full well that no one could manufacture that cure without the Venom spirit art. So, when the CEO was about to end the call, saying he would limit sales volume while waiting for the supply, Tiju asked for the packaging machine. And as he began to complain that packaging the medicine took longer than creating it, which was why he had been locked in his lab for 7 days, he was promised that he would soon have a machine. Meanwhile, outside the room, 2 orphans debated whether the person inside was a ghost or a beggar to be thrown out. The boy assured the girl that there were no ghosts in their secret base, and that it was just a vagrant to be kicked out. A sudden movement scared the children. At that moment, the door opened, and an ominous presence emerged from the smoke. As soon as the suspicious-looking man spoke, the children ran for their lives from the ghost that smelled bad. Tiju, who had spent countless hours packaging the bottles, considered the children quite rude for insulting him. The protagonist doubted his smell was that horrible despite not having bathed in 7 days. He remembered that he had a meeting with his former boss because one of his workers had run away, and that he might be late if he wasted time bathing. Only then was he approached by someone. The person seemed to be a lady. She had heard from her father that our hero had signed a contract with him to work on some kind of antidote. The protagonist stated that he was Kim Tiju and asked the woman in front of him for her identity. It turned out that the lady was from the orphanage, and her name was Beek Sayin. She came here to check on the ghost the children had warned her about. Sayin also wanted to deliver a special package to him. Reading the label, Tiju realized that this was the prototype the blacksmith had sent him, so he thanked the lady. Having said that, she urged him to maintain a good relationship with her father. And as she left, Sayin begged him to shower before leaving the orphanage and went on her way. Shortly after, excitement got the better of him, and he decided to check the prototype of the flying daggers before showering. Upon opening the package, he found a note inside. It was a note from the blacksmith, who cheekily asked him to let him know if the prototype needed any improvements. It was safe to say that our hero was not interested in such things, so he quickly tore the note to pieces. Relieved, Tiju decided to check one of the blades. He was quite satisfied as it was sharp and sturdy. The balance was excellent and the grip was pleasant. And so, seeing how excellent his weapons turned out to be, the young man began to look forward to the coat. He remembered how the expensive item was offered to him for free, but seeing that he had earned some money, he decided to do the right thing, and then Tiju remembered he was short on time and hurried to the shower. A little later that day, in the magical beast border area on the mountain, the protagonist finally joined the rest of the group. He immediately greeted his former boss. The man welcomed him with open arms. Tiju apologized for being late, so the boss revealed that they had also just arrived before thanking him for coming on such short notice. But while our hero assured the boss that he was just returning the kindness shown to him, someone rude began to speak. That person was irritated that a mere porter was delaying their hunt and demanded that he apologize. That arrogant person was a beginner named Jong Won-jun, a member of the assault team, who reminded them both that this was not a social gathering. Tiju asked this man to be careful with his words and stated that he had no reason to apologize. Being treated like that by someone without a rank greatly irritated the sword user, as he felt the porter should simply submit and apologize. Tiju felt a burning desire to take the life of that nuisance and understood why the first guy, whom he was replacing, had fled. At that moment, he was explained that the penalty for breaking the contract was high, and he was urged to control himself as much as possible while insults kept coming. Having lived his entire life being insulted, Tiju decided to play along and finally apologized. At that moment, the other group members asked the swordsman to stop wasting time, pointing out that he was really about to cut the porter. Having said that, when the boss apologized to him, the team leader ordered everyone to move forward. Tiju was intrigued by the fact that they were going to do a raid that required 15 people with only a group of 7. He decided to warn the group that, despite it being fashionable to get rid of team members for the mosquito antidote, they needed more people for this. The swordsman scolded the porter for daring to respond, but Tiju stated that in case he was in danger, he would not participate in the raid. At that moment, the group member stated that he had had enough of someone who was destined to die. This greatly intrigued our hero. Jun decided to immediately end the arrogant one's life. Kwandong Seo remembered that they needed porters and threatened Theo with killing them and retorted. Jun stated that porters lived peacefully, as he had never seen one so arrogant as to question the group's number. The leader joked that the porter would run away if insulted, and the swordsman said he would kill him then. Theo couldn't take it anymore and began to wonder if he should just kill these wretches instead of putting up with their insults, seeing that he was now strong enough. Having said that, the team leader asked all members to drink their antidote before continuing on their way. The boss then apologized to the hero for causing him so much trouble. So Theo stated it was okay and asked if they would be fine with just 7 people. Today's home turf was the Leaf-Tooth Marten area, and thanks to the antidote, groups now needed fewer people and no longer had to use anti-insect suits to advance. The boss stated that it was reassuring to have 2 beginners on his side before handing the hero a bottle of the antidote. Theo accepted his own product with a smile while thinking about all the good he had done. He began to remember how the mage told him that to return the favor, he simply had to save more people from dying in vain. However, although his new skills were saving countless lives by protecting them from mosquitoes, they had also influenced him. 2 times in a row, Theo felt no hesitation when thinking about killing the group members. The main reason behind this was his connection with the supreme venom demon. That man was not the forgiving type at all and always prioritized killing those who had wronged him. Due to the soul bond, our hero had acquired his poisonous heart, but he was not against this, as on his own he was too weak to survive in this world. Theo then asked the boss to stay close to him, but the man tried to argue that, despite his bad reputation, it would be safer for him to stay with an awakened one. The hero stated that he was serious, as he could sense a kind of dark presence deep in the forest. It was a fierce monster directing its claws toward them. One day in Murim, while the Shuji clan was burning in flames, the one responsible made his appearance. The old man on the ground was exhausted and wounded. Sujai-chin, the patriarch of the clan, shouted at Tang Gunhak for daring to cause them so much trouble. At that moment, the venomous one began to laugh at the lightning demon. He even pointed out how the old man in front of him and the rest of his clan had been secretly working with the demonic cult. The patriarch shouted that it was all a trap, considering that they were one of the 5 great clans. However, the one who controlled the blades stated that all demonic followers were liars before throwing something at him. The old man was completely horrified. His son's head rolled to his feet. The venom demon stated that this was what he deserved for daring to sacrifice civilians in order to create the demonic blood pill. He challenged him to repeat that it was all a trap. The venom demon detested the lightning demon, who sacrificed the weak for his own gain. At that moment, the old man tried to negotiate for his life, promising information about the celestial demon in return. Still, the young man could not overlook the fact that countless souls had died because of the lightning demon's sins. For that reason, he decided to punish him immediately, and thus, a rain of poisonous blades fell upon him. Our hero's counterpart also deeply wished to inflict the same punishment on the celestial demon. Back in the present on Earth, the group members felt relieved to see that hunting martens had become a simple task, as they no longer had to worry about mosquitoes. The swordsman was euphoric over the overwhelming loot, and called the coward a chicken for doubting their success, stating that he would always be a porter. Tiju struggled to contain his rage, as the group had only succeeded thanks to the antidote he had created. At that moment, he began to seriously think about killing them. However, in the end, he decided not to make those annoying opponents the first targets of his new throwing knives. Tiju knew perfectly well that the group would have had much more difficulty hunting the beasts if not for his antidote. Still, he greatly doubted his ability to handle what came next. Once again, the hero warned the boss about the imminent danger and urged him to stay close, but the man was especially confused. Tiju stated that they would face a simple and famous challenge of this mountain, the attack of a magical beast. Upon seeing the creature, the boss began to tremble. Everyone was horrified by the appearance of a wolf with red fur. However, Tiju reassured the boss by telling him they had nothing to fear and urged him to hold onto his backpack, which left him particularly intrigued. This wolf was an opponent that would require a regular ranked person to handle it. However, this was not the scariest thing about them, as these animals moved in groups of 10. Jun was taken by surprise by the appearance of the second wolf, so he began to swing his sword hoping to kill the creatures. But the wolf quickly dodged the approaching blade. Seeing this, the swordsman began to panic and asked the team leader for orders. However, the team leader in question had already started fleeing. While the girl accompanying him screamed in panic, the despicable individual assured her that they would only follow their usual plan. They would throw the porters to distract the wolves and thus escape safely. With that, the old boss began to panic and begged Tiju to find a solution. Our hero was more than happy to do so. He immediately threw his projectile using the flying dagger art, unique flash. And so, the dagger traveled at high speed, grazing the swordsman's skull as well as the team leader's face. In the end, it became embedded in a rock, and immediately screams of agony echoed throughout the forest. The boss was horrified by what he had seen. Tiju then rebuked the first for abandoning his own team, and the second for wanting to sacrifice the weaker members to save himself. There was nothing our hero despised more than cowards who would abandon the weak for their own benefit. The swordsman and the team leader were still suffering, having lost their ears. Only then did Jun notice something absolutely astonishing. One of the wolves had already fallen dead. The boss, trembling, asked the protagonist how he had managed to kill the monster in a single blow. At that moment, the remaining red wolf decided to avenge its companion. However, the martial artist was not about to allow it. Angry, he threatened to end the beast's life if it dared to move. Tiju then turned to the group and asked them if this was normal for them. He wanted to know if they always sacrificed the weakest member when they found themselves in a dangerous situation. Jun shouted that it was natural for the less important to die for the sake of the awakened ones. Tiju had expected such an answer. That was why he decided to give them a taste of their own medicine, and just like that, he quickly moved to a safe spot. Tiju then ordered them to fight. The one-eared men were stunned. Since he had already killed the first wolf, he wanted the group to handle the second. The team leader stated that this was complete nonsense and assured that Tiju would regret angering the awakened ones. Then he began shouting at his terrified group companion, who promised the hero a generous reward if he helped them. And so, another knife was thrown toward him. Tiju concluded that the tall one did not need his ears, as he seemed unable to understand words. The protagonist then reminded them that his job was to carry things, while theirs was to do all the fighting. He even began to criticize them, as they were much more confident when fighting the Martins, and thus he ordered them to fight. Tiju was quite serious about this. With that, everyone was shocked, especially the swordsman, who stated that they would not comply with his demands. However, Tiju warned that they could not afford to refuse him with the red wolf in their hands. Having said that, the sword-bearer asked that the members of his group hold the line, and thus he was slapped in the face. The creature's claw was strong enough to tear his head from his shoulders. At that moment, the team leader promised to take the porter's life. However, while he cursed the sacrificial lamb, he did not notice the wolf now beside him. And so, the upper half of the team leader was torn off in a single bite by the wolf. When the two remaining women decided to flee, the creature immediately took care of one of them. Thus, with only one group member left, the ruthless creature focused its attention on its last prey. And so, it used its powerful jaws. It finished off the last of the group members. The creature then turned its gaze. After all, there was still one more prey on the ground. The boss began to worry as the monster was looking at him as if he were a snack. Tiju was especially annoyed, as he had wanted to let the creature live if it had decided to flee. After killing a bunch of nobodies, the wolf seemed to have become arrogant, despite having witnessed the difference in power between him and the protagonist. With that, only one option remained. Tiju decided to take its life. Having said that, he channeled all his power, and thus, the venomous palm of the blood seal was unleashed upon the creature. This caused a giant shockwave that reached the skies. The boss was speechless, as he had not expected someone unawakened to be so powerful. At that moment, he realized that back then, Tiju was the one who had annihilated the orcs and had tried to hide it by giving all the credit to the mage. With that, the boss began to wonder what Tiju had in store for him, since he had witnessed everything that happened. And so, he fell to his knees and begged for his life. Tiju reassured the boss, assuring him that he had no intention of harming him. This was a great relief. When asked if he was injured, the man clarified that he was perfectly fine. Then Tiju decided to ask the boss for a favor. With a single threatening glance, everything became clear. The trembling porter immediately realized that he had to keep his mouth shut about what had just happened. And having said that, both decided to leave the mountain. As for the corpses, they left them rotting under the sun. Tiju, who was already remembering his fight with the first lieutenant, began to think about how the beasts would devour the corpses and how his conscience was clear. In fact, neither he nor his counterpart, the martial arts master, could tolerate those who sacrificed the weak for their own benefit. He could not help but compare such vile individuals to those of the Shuji clan. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of Ujai Pharmacy in Gyuri Castle, a meeting was being held in the conference room. Those present were scandalized by the fact that sales had dropped by 50%. They began to blame Tiju and Hong Pio for this, as everyone was drawn to Beak Drugstore due to the mosquito cure. The fat man shouted that they had turned a blind eye for too long and that they should have crushed their small rival long ago. Owan Bak, the president of Seokai Pyong, reminded them that despite owning most of the pharmacies in the city, with Chen Wang controlling the rest, Beak was the only one that had not submitted. President Lee Gil-ho of Jayugni Drugstore blamed the committee for protecting Hong Pio simply because he owns the orphanage. Nam Bak told his fat friend that he should try to think of a solution instead of complaining, which almost sparked a dispute. At that moment, Jo Hoon Seok, the representative of Jo Yi Pharmacy, calmed the two men who always argued with each other. He stated that they must work together and show honesty, starting by admitting that their group had failed. From the looks of it, all the large companies had failed in trying to copy the cure manufactured by the protagonist. Still, Nam Bak was sure that his company would be able to create the antidote over time. His colleague shouted that he did not care in the slightest and stated that they needed an immediate solution to avoid bankruptcy. Having said that, the representative of Jo Yi stated that their hands were tied and that, despite being worried about the committee, they must proceed as usual. The fat man expected that from his friend and asked him if the investigation was finished. The representative decided to share his information. They were able to discover that the creator of the antidote was a discharged 29-year-old officer and the eldest son of Brigadier General Kim Wang-bong of Paju. Nam Bak did not like this information, as it meant they should not mess with the protagonist since he was the son of a master. However, Hoon Seok stated that was just the tip of the iceberg. According to his information, Tiju was a Mana reject who became a soldier after being kicked out of his home, and his father had a Japanese wife who wanted him dead and had 2 children of her own. The fat man immediately theorized that the protagonist had run away from his family. Hoon Seok confirmed this and decided to go see Tiju to make him an offer even more lucrative than Beak Hong Pio's, and if he refused, they would simply resort to their usual bloody methods. Later that day, at the Imperial Army's Magical Beast Defense Corps on Mount Jiri, someone knocked on the commander's door. The person in charge wanted to know if his information had arrived. The officer confirmed, stating that this information was provided to them by the Free City Autonomy Committee. After learning about our hero's personal information, the commander realized that he was the Mana-rejected son of General Kim. In the past, the army had requested a supply contract that was rejected by the Free City, but since the manufacturer was a soldier, they might still have a chance. By acquiring the antidote, the army could launch a large-scale subjugation operation before the magical beast wave. Lieutenant General Oh In-shin, thinking of his master son, believing everything would be easy since father and son still maintained a good relationship, demanded an immediate meeting with General Kim. The next day in our hero's hometown, inside his father's office, the general finally hung up the phone. Having said that, he took a deep breath. His wife expressed how surprised she was to see that Tiju had become so important when before he was too weak even for college. Having said that, she hurried to book tickets for the Free City, claiming that they must help the newly enriched young man as he could easily fall for a scam. However, he asked her not to bother him. The father did not want anything to do with the black sheep of the family, who had been removed from the family register. His furious wife reminded him that, regardless of the register, the two were still bound by blood and must help each other. And still, as she appealed to his conscience, she realized that he was aware of her assassination request. She trembled, but calmed down, believing there was no evidence, as the first lieutenant had died. She shouted at her husband to ask his son for the military antidote, as that would help him greatly in his evaluation for promotion. She stated that the family's territory could no longer support them, and that the general must also think about the tuition for his other 2 children. And for that reason, General Kim asked her to go see her stepson herself. He reminded her that her intentions were clear. Having said that, the wife was left frustrated. And so she left the room saying she would do her part before violently slamming the door behind her, and the general was finally alone. His son, whom he had given up for dead after months of disappearance, turned out to be living quite a good life in the Free City. In fact, the father was glad to see that his son was spending the rest of his days happily. Meanwhile, in the bustling market of the Free City, inside the Flame Boutique, among countless expensive suits that looked the same, the protagonist was given an outfit like no other. The mage stated that it suited him very well. Tiju was especially pleased with this excellent coat made of magical beast leather. It was not heavy, had good defensive stats, as well as good temperature control, and its color was also perfect. To top it off, the mage had added the many pockets he had requested. The lady, who had found this request strange, finally understood its meaning upon seeing how Tiju used many weapons, and asked him if he was also a hunter. Tiju decided to pay for his new coat worth 3.4 billion won, but the mage stated that she was simply returning his kindness. Our hero pointed out that the lady must have felt quite embarrassed because of him, since this gift was already intended for someone else. But the mage assured him that she had already compensated the customer in question. Tiju took a brief moment to think. With the decision made, he decided to order several other products. His goal was to help the lady's business while acquiring various gifts for the orphans. The mage had no choice but to accept and asked him to wait while she packed everything. For her, it was quite refreshing to deal with a good person for once, instead of the typical irritating awakened one. At that moment, someone else entered the boutique. A mysterious man hurried to greet our hero, stating that he had been looking for him. Then he approached him silently. Jo-hoon Seok introduced himself as the CEO of Ujai Pharmacy. At that moment, Tiju became cautious of the man. The CEO quickly realized that this unexpected visit had made the protagonist nervous. The young man stated that it was so and asked the CEO how he had managed to find him. Hoon Seok clarified that the Pharmacy Association knew everything that happened in the Free City. Having said that, he decided to get straight to the point. Jo-hoon Seok demanded that the hero sell them the mosquito antidote. Tiju could not help but feel that he was being threatened. The CEO stated that he was simply asking for a favor, which our hero immediately refused. Hoon Seok even offered him all the means to break the contract with Beek Hong Pio. However, Tiju stated that he had already given his word. When asked to sell the formula for 5 billion won, our hero clarified that he would never sell it so cheap. The CEO was beginning to lose patience. He clarified to the young man that angering him would not make his life in the Free City easier, but the martial artist did not care in the slightest and dismissed the man. At that moment, the lady came out thinking a customer had entered, so Tiju explained that it was just a beggar he had thrown out. Once outside, Jo-hoon Seok decided to make the protagonist eat his words, so he immediately made a phone call and urged his people to begin the usual operation. Later that day, at the border of the Free City where the protagonist's mansion was being built, he was seen carrying many bags. He finally arrived at this place. The former owner was intrigued to see him carrying so much. Tiju explained that he had bought clothes for the orphans as a way to express his gratitude to their director. At that moment, the old man began to cry. He was so moved by the hero's kindness that he promised to become an even better person. Tiju was pleased with this reaction. He was also grateful to Hong Pio, as thanks to him, the construction of his mansion had progressed smoothly. And as he pointed out that he wanted to accept his proposal, the old man asked him if he was sure about it. Tiju declared that he had made a decision after receiving the visit from Jo-hoon Seok. This enraged the director greatly, who feared that the CEO had harmed the protagonist. Tiju reassured him by saying that he had only been threatened and explained how that interaction reminded him of the way people treat the helpless. For that reason, he decided to follow the old man's advice and create his own pharmaceutical company, urging the old boss to continue helping him. Then, Tiju asked the old man to continue the good work on the construction until he returned. While waiting for his new company to see the light of day, the hero declared that he wanted to go and create new medicines. However, internally, he was especially annoyed by the fact that no one had noticed his expensive new coat. The Chaos Form Venom Spirit art was developed by the Supreme Venom Demon, the strongest warrior in all of Murim. It was a mix of the traditional techniques of his clan, as well as the Kai cultivation of the 5 elements, with a bit of inspiration from other martial arts. It was divided into 10 stars, and each level allowed the user to acquire a new skill. After obtaining the 10 stars, one needed to achieve enlightenment to obtain the Venom Spirit, which was the key to the secret technique, Rain of 10,000 Torrential Petals. This technique allowed the Venom Demon to defeat the Celestial Demon, who was the leader of his demonic cult. Back on Earth, in the magical beast outbreak zone, a powerful shockwave had occurred. A fight between man and beast had broken out. The Venom user took a deep breath. He firmly grabbed his knife before driving it into his opponent's skull. And so, the giant monster was defeated. Tiju achieved a crushing victory. He did not expect something called a venom claw lynx to be so big. Due to its tough skin, Tiju had great difficulty fighting it using his internal energy and weapons. He was currently at the 3rd star and between a first-rate and second-rate warrior, which was a pitiful state of power, and the reason he needed to consume the venom of monsters. Tiju came across a large venom gem and began to think about how easy cultivation was with the old martial artist's knowledge. Seeing that he had all that knowledge on his side, it would be easy for our protagonist to achieve rapid growth. At first, his body could not handle much venom, but seeing that he had now stabilized, he was finally ready to surpass the 3rd star. For that reason, he began to fantasize about the venom of the spotted spore venom water deer. Only then did he return to reality and realize that he had to recover his very expensive throwing knives. The spotted spore venom water deer was a peaceful creature that did not attack humans. It had 2 humps on its back, making it comparable to a camel. In the blink of an eye, Tiju decapitated the poor creature without thinking twice. The scariest thing about this creature was the fact that its humps exploded upon death. With that, its microscopic toxic spores were released into the air. Thus, the hero found himself surrounded by countless venomous bubbles. This venom was potent enough to melt gas masks and needed 60 minutes to dissipate naturally. After careful examination, the hero decided to absorb the venom immediately, as it was the strongest he had ever seen. And so he began. Tiju started using his power to absorb the venom. He did his best to concentrate. His goal was to focus all the venomous energy. By doing so, he would be able to absorb it. If the protagonist managed to absorb all the venom, he could finally reach the next star. Later that day, after countless hours of Kai circulation, the hero began to think that perhaps he had absorbed too much water deer venom, as he had spent a long time converting it into internal energy. Since the Earth had a greater diversity of venoms than the martial world, our hero was assured of rapid growth. He refused to experience weakness once more. In fact, he no longer wanted to bow to anyone ever again. With that, after countless hours of hard work, Kim Tiju finally reached the 4th star. Having said that, he finally stood up. His trip to the mountain had taken longer than expected. Yes, he had become stronger and even found an antidote for the water deer venom. So Tiju decided to return home. Seeing that he was worried about the pharmacy and the orphanage, he did not want to waste any more time. That night at the old owner's drugstore, the hero finally put down his backpack. Tiju then hurried to greet the old man. He assumed things must be going very well, seeing that the shelves were empty. Beek expressed how worried he was, since the protagonist had been unreachable for 15 consecutive days. The worried receptionist also welcomed him back. Tiju apologized and explained that he needed to focus on training and research before asking about the problem at hand. It turned out that many pharmaceutical companies had withdrawn their products from the shelves and did not want to supply anymore. To make matters worse, the Drug Approval Department of the Autonomy Committee asked for the list of ingredients of the antidote to check for possible side effects. Tiju immediately realized that Jo Hoon Seok was behind all this. The owner explained that this was the SIO's favorite hunting method and revealed to the hero how he was the Emperor General of the committee. Furthermore, refusing to provide the ingredient list would result in the product being banned from sale. After carefully reasoning, Tiju realized that the enemy must still have more problems prepared for them. The despicable individuals were acting just as he had expected, so the hero decided to catch the enemy off guard. Thus, Tiju proposed to Beek Hong Pio to double down on the committee's threat, but the owner did not fully understand what he meant. Our protagonist stated that they should stop selling their product, since there were rumors that it had side effects on consumers. During that night at the orphanage, smoke rose into the air and meat was being cooked. The entire orphanage, along with its guest of honor, was enjoying a small barbecue. After taking the first bite, Tiju was completely stunned. The meat he had just tasted was absolutely heavenly. The taste of the spotted spore venom water deer was considered the best in the entire empire. Tiju quickly realized that the rumors about the emperor gathering all the water deer carcasses that could be purified of venom were actually true. The fact that he had prepared the antidote for this venom was the best decision he had made in his life. At first, our hero only wanted to protect civilians from the water deer venom in case of a magical beast wave. But now things were different. It could be said with certainty that this delicious food was addictive, which led the protagonist to speculate that he should start a water deer meat business. He began to fantasize about how the emperor, famous for his mastery of swordsmanship, would become his #1 customer, since he was addicted to meat. At that moment, the director decided to say a few words. Hong Pio thanked the protagonist for giving them such a delicious delicacy. Even praised him for creating an antidote for the water deer venom. Still, the man expressed his concern that they had closed the pharmacy for a long time. However, Tiju explained that this was for the best. Only time would reveal the result and show who would truly suffer more from them not selling the antidote. On an ordinary day of the week, Jinsu was especially annoyed, as the pharmacy had been closed for 5 days and he was about to run out of antidote bottles. Some people began to speculate that the rumors about the serious side effects of the antidote were true, stating that this forced the old owner to close his shop. Upon hearing this, the beta tester felt especially irritated seeing these two gossiping just for the sake of it. However, as soon as he tried to intervene, someone quickly stopped him. Li Yuncheng was there to maintain order. The captain of the vigilantes began to attract a crowd murmuring about the possible relationship between the Wichota pharmacy and the committee. The captain asked everyone to keep moving before explaining that the committee had decided to ban the sale of the antidote until they could review the formula for side effects. At that moment, the beta tester began to shout that there were no side effects, and that without the antidote, they would have to go back to using the insect-proof suits. As the public's complaints grew louder and louder, the captain of the vigilantes could not help but flash a mocking smile. He was annoyed by the fact that someone inferior to him had the audacity to talk back. But in the end, he decided not to waste his sword on them and began to think about how annoying it was that the administrative officer made him do this. So, as everyone continued on their way, the only loyal customer decided to stand firm. Seeing this, the captain of the vigilantes asked him if he had the power to back up his arrogance. And so, without further ado, Jinsu fled the scene. The captain did not care about the medicine at all, but he wanted to catch Jo Hoon Seok, who was manipulating the committee. Meanwhile, watching from afar on the phone with the administrative officer, Jo Hoon Seok expressed how happy he was to see that the officer had forced the captain of the vigilantes to do what he wanted. The administrative officer explained that, thanks to him and the president, the third permanent committee member would always be outvoted. Pointing out that Lee Young-hak only intervenes in extreme situations, the CEO explained that they had already begun the second phase of the plan. He promised the administrative officer a great reward and stated that, unless the enemy got money by a miracle, they would not last much longer. Meanwhile, in the office of Lieutenant General Oh Jin-hyung, negotiations were taking place. Tiju decided to deliver 1 million bottles to the Magical Beast Defense Corps at market price. The Lieutenant General paused for a second, and pointing out the extremely high price, Tiju worried that he had upset the man by demanding the market price from the army. However, to his complete surprise, the officer beside him stated that his commander seemed very pleased with this. When the Lieutenant General stated that Tiju was selling his product at a rather low price, the young man was especially confused. Upon confirming that they had the necessary funds, the commander demanded that half of the money be given immediately to the hero as a down payment. However, Tiju had one more product to demonstrate. Tiju, who wanted to create his own company, had managed to devise a new product. The young man then presented the package and urged the commander to try it. The master was especially confused, as he did not expect to receive cooked meat exclusively for him. The lieutenant general explained that he had been avoiding meat lately for the sake of his health. However, Tiju urged him to give that meat to the emperor. In that case, seeing that it was spore venom water deer meat, the other officer in the room was extremely surprised, as it was known that this meat had a texture like no other. The protagonist nodded in confirmation. Seeing how capable the young man in front of him was, the commander offered him the opportunity to rejoin the army. These simple words were enough to awaken our hero's killing instinct. The Mount Jiri Magical Beast Defense Corps exists as an order of the Empire. Its mission is to fight the magical beast waves and control their numbers, so upon arriving, the commander felt overwhelmed, as a great responsibility rested on his shoulders. However, on the other hand, he had finally found a way to save himself. The lieutenant general could not help but think about the water deer cure. At that moment, his subordinate informed him that the payment they had promised the hero had been successfully made, and that his orders were being carried out smoothly. The commander had already predicted that, due to Jo Hoon Seok, Tiju would turn to them, and he was informed about a water deer hunt scheduled for the next day. With that, the master asked his subordinate to keep an eye on the drug manufacturer and provide him with help if necessary. Then, the general praised the assistant, who, despite having no connections, always showed flawless results. The man felt happy, as he was finally being recognized by his superior. At that moment, the commander raised his voice and placed his hand on his subordinate's shoulder. The general could not help but cry as he urged the assistant to rise with him through the ranks all the way to the emperor. And so, the two began to chant our protagonist's name. Meanwhile, at the newly built Kim residence, the owner spoke about how he was not finding any problems in creating his company. The old man offered to take care of all the paperwork as soon as our hero chose a name for it. Tiju was extremely happy to have successfully signed the contract with the army and to have received great support from the lieutenant general. The commander seemed worthy of his position, as he quickly made it public that he had signed an exclusive contract with our protagonist. Beek Hong Pyo then explained how he had used the 25 billion advance from the army to pay off his loan, but also clarified that he closed his accounts at that particular bank, seeing all the problems they had caused him. Tiju stated that was the right decision and urged him to use the rest of the money for the good of the orphanage. He then clarified that, after thinking it over, running a company on his own would be quite challenging, so he declared that he needed a trusted partner. And so, he offered the old pharmacist the opportunity to become co-owner of his company. The orphanage director doubted that he could be up to the task, as his skills only extended to a small pharmacy, but the hero thought otherwise. Tiju was a genius with medicines, but when it came to the business world, he was completely ignorant, which was why he needed help. Hong Pyo did not expect his benefactor to see him as a reliable partner, so in the end he accepted. However, the old man insisted on receiving only 10% of the profits, but the hero refused. Since his partner would be in charge of operations only, he insisted that he receive at least 30% of the shares. In the end, Hong Pyo accepted, but stated that he would not be the one running things, as he had someone much more suitable for the position in mind. The old man was referring to Beek Soyeon, whom our hero had once met in the orphanage bunker. According to him, she was his smartest daughter, so he would contact her immediately. Hong Pyo had been the director of the orphanage for 2 decades, which meant he was connected to many members of society from different professions, making him powerful. And for that reason, the hero was convinced that making him his co-owner was the right decision. Tiju then suggested combining their names to name the company and proposed T. Hong Pyo. At that moment, the old man declared that he had contacted some of his older children who had become awakened, which confused the hero greatly. According to the old man, the CEO of Yujai Pharmacy was an evil man, so Tiju needed bodyguards. The young man declared that he did not need protection and urged his bodyguards to go protect his home. This surprised the old man greatly, as it seemed that his partner had something planned. Still, it could be said with certainty that the mark-free protagonist was not a powerful awakened one, which meant he was probably relying on his experience as a soldier. At that moment, the hero noticed the look in his eyes. Since his concern was misinterpreted as a lack of trust, Hong Pyo stated that was not the case. Having said that, the hero decided to adopt a different method. He demanded that the orphanage director call all the bodyguards immediately. Tiju wanted to demonstrate his power and test the antidote for the water deer venom, and the best way to do that was to go hunting with them. Later that day, in the magical beast border zone, the group began to advance through the forest. Some of the orphans began to admire the drug manufacturer's very expensive coat, as well as his high-quality equipment. Still, they were worried about him, thinking he was weak. With that, one of them patted their new boss on the shoulder. Beek Cheng-hoon, 25 years old, who had the rank of user, decided to walk in front since they were about to enter magical beast territory to ensure their safety. Tiju asked to be called Yongnim, a term that refers to someone not much older than the awakened one. The swordsman then explained that despite its good stats, the coat might get in the way and that as a user he was a better fighter than the protagonist. Thinking he had overstepped, the orphan immediately apologized. Tiju clarified that he understood his concern, seeing that he had no marks. However, he proposed leaving the discussion for after they resolved the problem at hand. This intrigued the swordsman. Only then did he notice countless eyes opening above his head. The awakened ones began to tremble upon seeing the storm martens, and so the beasts launched their attack. Faced with danger, the bodyguards prepared for combat. Cheng-hoon did not expect the monsters to appear so soon. Having said that, the drug manufacturer decided to act. He pulled out a bunch of nails, as well as some golf balls, from his pockets. Then the hero prepared himself and threw them all at once. This was his technique, dagger explosion. His bodyguard was especially astonished. Despite being weak, since they move in large groups, storm martens had to be taken seriously. However, something incredible was happening to these creatures, something that would strike fear into the heart of a rank user. They had been completely disintegrated. To top it off, Tiju did not even break a sweat. The hero felt quite annoyed by this pest. According to him, it was so pathetic that it died before he could even use his daggers against it. Tiju could not afford to harm the previous owner's children. To quickly finish off the enemy, he used hidden weapons known as pure flower torrential rain needles and iron pellets. The main problem for our hero was the fact that these weapons could not be recovered, which meant his wallet was going to take a good hit. Tiju was eager to reach the 7th star to finally acquire the recovery skill. At that moment, the young swordsman approached our hero and asked him if he was one of those masters who could hide their marks. Tiju clarified that to begin with, he was not an awakened one and that he would take the lead. Chang-hun tried to argue that his task was to protect him, but as Tiju effortlessly took the lead, the young man began to wonder who he really was. Later, after venturing into the tall grass, the prey was finally in sight. A water deer was spotted. Chang-hun began to panic and asked the protagonist what his plan was. Tiju then pointed out how the deer believed itself untouchable due to its venom. He then asked everyone to take the medicine so they could start the hunt. Still, the orphans had their doubts. After all, this medicine was still in the testing phase. On the other hand, the orphans needed to support their father, and they had already seen the power and brilliance of the drug creator. With that in mind, they decided to show their trust in him. Chang-hun decided to charge in first, asking his brothers to use the mana gun in case the prey tried to escape. With that decided, the swordsman drew his sword. He charged head-on at the monster. Upon sensing the danger, the water deer began to scream. The creature was so loud that even the awakened ones could barely stay on their feet from its shriek. Still, the swordsman managed to escape the brunt of the attack by leaping into the air. From above, he unleashed his skill, Bisector Slash. Chang-hun successfully decapitated the monster. The orphans remained on guard as the spores were about to be released. Just in time, the bubble on the deer's back finally burst. The highly venomous spores were then released into the air. Tiju, who initially had his doubts, was extremely pleased with the results. The antidote was a success, and the brave young man with little potential also seemed promising. The orphans were delighted that the venom was not affecting them. Chang-hun felt relieved by the success of the antidote. The protagonist stated that his point had been proven and that without its venom, the water deer posed no threat. While some of the happy orphans apologized for having doubted him, others assured him that they had always believed in him. With the danger overcome, the hero decided to resume the hunt. However, before continuing, he asked his bodyguard to take the deer meat, pointing out that once the antidote became public, the species would be hunted to extinction. Meanwhile, in New Seoul, located in the former Manchuria region, at the MG headquarters, the employees were as busy as ever. At that moment, someone approached Manager Beek. Soyeon, 30 years old, the youngest manager in the strategic planning department, responded to the deputy director with a smile. The man, known as Jeon Juhak, decided to get straight to the point and asked the girl if she was really an orphan raised by Hong Pyo. She confirmed it, intrigued by the fact that they mentioned her father. The deputy director, pleased to hear this, urged her to postpone all her current projects. This surprised the young manager. Jeon Juhak wanted her to return to her hometown to do him a favor. She did not quite understand what he meant. The deputy director then pointed out that the creation of the company known as Hong Pyo was all over the news. Intrigued by his sudden behavior, she explained that she had read about this company that created the antidote for the water deer venom. However, what she did not know was that her own father was co-owner of this new company. The deputy director, acting on behalf of his powerful superiors, wanted her to return to her father and obtain the antidote formula. In exchange for doing so, they promised her a generous reward. Soyeon was annoyed that they asked her to betray the orphanage director, but just as she was about to speak, her phone began to ring. Seeing that it was her father, she asked for a moment to speak with him. Hong Pyo began to talk to his daughter. The deputy director anxiously waited for her to finish the call. In the end, the young woman said goodbye to her father with a smile. Having said that, he asked for her final decision. Soyeon had decided to return to her hometown. At first, this seemed like good news to the bald man. Then suddenly, she threw her badge at him. The youngest manager in the company decided to resign from her job. She had grown tired of seeing someone as low as the deputy director trying to trample on others. Having done that, she left, flipping off her former boss, who was shouting furiously at her. Later that night, inside the building owned by our protagonist, the orphans were working hard. Tiju praised them for their effort. Then he asked them to return to the orphanage and leave the rest to him. Chang-hun remained worried and tried to argue that their father had ordered them to escort the drug creator at all times. But Tiju demonstrated that he did not need protection and urged the bodyguards to return to the orphanage and protect it. Thus, Tiju began to think about how unlikely it was that anyone would try to harm the only orphanage in this city for fear of public backlash. However, there were many madmen among the sons of Adam, and the free city seemed to have quite a few of them. For that reason, Tiju needed trusted allies like the orphans. After establishing the company and acquiring the necessary personnel to process the antidote ingredients, Tiju would finally be free to create new medicines. At first, he simply wanted to save money for himself, but now things were different. Tiju had nothing against having a generous income. After all, if it were not for that, he would not be able to afford such a luxurious apartment. He felt strange entering his own home for the first time. The protagonist then hung up his coat. He, who thought he would perish in Tiju, struggled to stay alive after they tried to kill him. After the experience of sharing souls with his martial artist counterpart, he went to live in the free city as a porter before creating his first antidote. However, the greatest blessing at that time were the kind people he met. Tiju had gotten into many adventures in such a short time. In his eyes, the free city was simply the first step toward achieving his own independence. Later that night, the boss of the beginner-rank villain syndicate, Shik, stepped onto our hero's property alongside his subordinate. He felt jealous of the protagonist since, despite being a newcomer, he already had his own building. The subordinate stated that this was because the mosquito antidote had become very popular before pointing out the upcoming release of the deer antidote. The villain boss ordered his man to stop stating the obvious. Shik felt quite annoyed since, if it were not for the orders from the CEO of Ujai Pharmacy, he would have kidnapped Yu and stolen the formula. But in the end, he had no choice but to follow Zhou Hun Siok's orders. After a few minutes forcing the lock, the criminals finally managed to enter the house. The boss urged his man to skip the talk with the target and inject him with the drug that would make his kidnapping very easy. With that, the door opened silently. With a syringe in hand, they crept closer, and once close enough, the criminal decided to act. But just as the needle was about to make contact, the criminal's hand was suddenly stopped. Tiju, who had been awake all along, revealed that at first he wanted to allow the injection. The boss urged his man to stop wasting time and finish the job once and for all. However, upon learning that his subordinate's hand was stuck, the crime syndicate boss was completely stunned. Tiju began to act while stating that he had seen them coming from afar. And so, before the criminal could even realize it, his target and his syringe had disappeared. Tiju had never liked those small, painful needles. At that moment, the criminals began to doubt that their target was a mana reject. With an arrogant smile, the hero asked the villains if the drug would be just as effective if drunk. This insolence and audacity enraged the boss of the villain syndicate greatly. Only then did something unexpected happen. Their target had voluntarily drunk the drug. Tiju enjoyed the effects of that medicine and decided to ask his opponents for more. It had long been known that there was an evil syndicate trafficking drugs in the free city, and it was obvious that they had backing from someone on the committee. The product of their trafficking, which was also a venom, was now in the hands of our protagonist. It was the first time he had encountered such a venom. Seeing that he was now at the 4th star, the hero could handle it easily, while beginning to think about how his master had tried all kinds of drugs in his time. For that reason, Tiju decided to become an addict, just like him. In order to increase his venom essence, he absorbed the drugs from his opponent's body. Seeing this, the boss of the villain syndicate was horrified. Tiju demanded to know who was behind all this. However, the aggressor refused to answer, fearing for his life. So the hero did what he had to do, making screams echo through the night. When the next day finally arrived, the vigilante captain was thinking as he looked out the window. Kim Tiju, the creator of the miracle drug, had reported a crime. His subordinate confirmed that he had caught some gangsters at his house trying to kidnap him, and that, after discovering the mastermind, they needed his services. The master immediately realized that the CEO of Ujai Pharmacy was behind all this and began to blame him for his failure. The fastest way to solve this problem would have been to simply take him away. But obviously the CEO would be too troublesome. He realized that he had a difficult case on his hands and that his group would have a hard time since he was in charge of the investigation. For that reason, the captain began to speculate that there was only one option available. Meanwhile, at our hero's residence, while the two owners were in front of their prisoners, the villain boss was in a sort of vegetative state. At that moment, someone arrived. The vigilantes finally reached the scene. Hong Pio welcomed the master and his group with open arms. However, to his greatest surprise, he was immediately ignored. The master positioned himself above the gangster, and while one of the vigilantes tried to keep the old owner away, his captain drew his sword. Then the man resorted to his authority and decided to execute the villain boss right there. Only then, something was thrown at him. The man quickly deflected the approaching flying dagger. Tiju demanded to know why the captain was trying to kill the witness. Then he showed a video in which the villain boss confessed that the CEO of Ujai Pharmacy was behind the kidnapping and wanted to hook the protagonist on drugs. However, from what it seemed, he quickly deduced that the captain must have been aware of all this. When asked his name, the arrogant one claimed to be called Tiju. The captain immediately recognized him as the drug developer. Then he decided to calm down. The awakened master then decided to get a better look at the person before him, and to his surprise, he seemed quite familiar. Only then did he realize that he was facing the same porter from back then. Tiju did not answer at first when asked if he was really behind the mosquito antidote. Our hero confirmed it. The swordsman then stated that it was no big deal. Shortly after, he flashed an arrogant smile. The captain then stated firmly that he was the law in the free city. He decided to give the protagonist one last chance to end things quickly by executing the criminals once and for all. Still, Tiju refused. Seeing this, the master challenged the mana reject to try to stop the execution. Tiju barely had time to react. He immediately pulled out his knives and threw them at the captain. The man was alerted by the approaching projectiles, so he unleashed a storm of slashes to defend himself. It was now obvious to him that the drug creator had captured the criminals by himself. He could not help but praise his skill, seeing that he had managed to scratch him. Thus, seeing that he had prevented the execution twice, the permanent committee member sentenced Tiju to death. Still, the protagonist did not care in the slightest. However, while our hero continued speaking, he noticed something intriguing. He leaped into the air to dodge the approaching blade and threw his knives at his opponent. Tiju was preparing a powerful attack. His opponent was doing the same. Only then was the fight interrupted by the arrival of a helicopter. Suddenly, men in work suits jumped out of it. The lieutenant general, who made a spectacular entrance, was there to stop the troublesome vigilante captain. By jumping from the helicopter and landing on the ground, the commander halted the ongoing battle. With the arrival of the army, everyone went on guard. The lieutenant general greeted his old acquaintance. Lee Yong-hak demanded to know what the army was doing in the free city. The commander pointed out that he no longer needed permission to visit there. The captain accused the army of meddling in his city's affairs. The powerful awakened one clarified that he was not there as a lieutenant general. Oh-jin Hyung declared that he was there as a civilian. For that reason, he proposed to the other master that they not meddle in each other's affairs. It could be said with certainty that this infuriated him greatly. Having said that, the civilian hurried to check on how his friend was, who stated that he was not injured. Still, some of the masters with the rank of Major General, Gu Junyoung, stated that he would take down anyone who mistreated the one who gave them the antidote. Another master of rank, known as Park Pil-sung, offered to give him some of his people as bodyguards. The third major, known as Hong Jun-ti, proposed getting him some medicine. Seeing this, the vigilante captain assumed that Tiju already knew these powerful army brutes because his father was a brigadier general. Therefore, he decided to swallow his pride and leave. Oh-jin Hyung invited him to stay a little longer, but Master Lee stated that, unlike them, he was a busy man. However, the soldier said that he did not seem busy at all. When asked to explain, the lieutenant general reprimanded the vigilante captain for his poor work, seeing that such criminals still roamed the streets of his city. When reinforcements were offered, he immediately rejected them. And with that, the captain decided to take his prisoners and leave. Then, Oh-jin Hyung declared that he would keep the criminals. The committee member interpreted this as a military intervention. When confronted about it, the lieutenant general explained that he had to punish them since they had tried to harm his friend. Lee Yong-hak tried to invoke the imperial decree, so his opponent decided to take a different approach. Oh-jin Hyung reminded him that, despite both being masters, they were far from equals. At that moment, the captain began to sweat. Oh-jin Hyung firmly clarified that the emperor would not care about punishing them if he took his life at that very moment. As the trembling vigilante explained that there would be consequences, the other three masters began to laugh at him and eagerly awaited the order to beat him up. At that moment, Lee Yong-hak realized he was in a difficult situation. Seeing his subordinates trembling, he realized he had no other choice. Having said that, he decided to retreat in silence. Oh-jin Hyung pointed out that the captain had been pampered for a long time within his own city. Having said that, the hero thanked his savior. The lieutenant general was willing to do anything to help an ally. It turned out that they had come to the scene as soon as Hong Pio called them, and so the worst was avoided. Thanks to the Lieutenant General's intervention, both the protagonist and his partner came out unscathed. To top it off, they were even able to keep their witnesses. As soon as the criminals were mentioned, Jin Hyung stated that he would take them to catch the mastermind behind everything. But Tae-ju tried to clarify that that problem concerned only him. But the soldier seemed to think otherwise, since the entire army would be in danger if the enemy manipulated the antidote's production. He even clarified that the drug creator was no longer obligated to deal with the vigilante captain. This made Tae-ju think about how his fourth-star poison was still too weak to affect a master. It did not seem to affect him at all, and if it were not for the Lieutenant General's intervention, victory would not have seemed as assured as defeat. For that reason, Tae-ju wanted to acquire more power so he would never feel helpless again. Meanwhile, the vigilante captain began to think about how he wanted the hero and the commander to die. It was then that he realized that he had been scratched by the hero's throwing knives. He began to speculate that they were poisonous. At that moment, Lee Young-hak was overcome by a sudden pain. The poison had begun to spread. At that instant, he realized he was in a difficult situation. His subordinate quickly noticed that something was wrong, so he received the order to take him to the hospital immediately. Having said that, the vigilante stepped on the accelerator, and so a master had been severely weakened. Later, while flying through the air, all the military personnel watched over the prisoners. Fearing for his life, the villain syndicate boss promised to tell them everything, but the general stated that his testimony was not necessary. Having said that, he turned to one of his men. The subordinate immediately grabbed the handle and opened the helicopter door. At that moment, the criminals were filled with fear upon receiving the order to throw them out. And so, the four criminals met a cold and crushing end. The task had been completed. Then Junti was ordered to make the CEO of Ujai Pharmacy meet the same fate. The commander even ordered the deployment of some troops to protect the hero's company. Jin Hyung finally had the opportunity to approach Kim Tae-ju. Meanwhile, at the train station, Soyeon received a call from Chang-hoon. The young woman told her brother that she had just arrived in the city. Then, she was surprised to learn that her father's partner had supplied billions of won to the orphanage. And upon learning that he had even completed his second antidote, Soyeon was completely astonished to discover that Tae-ju was not a scammer after all. Having said that, she ended the call as she got into the taxi. The girl asked the driver to take her home. Now she was sure that her return to the city would not be in vain. Later, at the former owner's orphanage, the children were as lively as ever. Hong Pyo was glad to see one of his little ones arrive. The girl stated that she had rushed home as soon as her father called her. Hong Pyo thanked her and asked her to accompany him. Soyeon asked if there was some kind of celebration and was curious about what was in the pot. Then, the old man stated that it was water deer poisoned with spores. Upon hearing this, she was especially astonished. This meant that her brother was telling the truth about the antidote, which her father confirmed. Then Hong Pyo proposed going to meet his business partner who was waiting for her. To keep himself busy, the hero decided to feed the orphans. With that, the old man decided to proceed with the introductions. Tae-ju greeted Soyeon with a smile. However, this was not their first interaction. The lady apologized for having been rude back then and explained that she was excited to work for his company. The protagonist then felt at ease, since she promised to do her best to improve Tae-ju. However, she was not the only one offering her services. When someone approached him, the hero turned around intrigued. That person was Major Do Min-soo, who was assigned to the security of this place, along with 19 of his men. The hero thanked him for his kindness, but noted that he might not have space to accommodate 20 soldiers. But the major stated that they could fend for themselves. And so, Tae-ju found himself working with the army once again. As the major was invited to join the banquet, he secretly looked forward to the water deer meat. So he ordered his soldiers to prepare everything and go eat. Kim Tae-ju no longer had to be alone, for he finally had his own people. Meanwhile, at the Free City Castle, inside the Autonomous Committee's meeting room, the past crimes of the CEO of Ujai Pharmacy were being brought to light. When asked if he admitted his crimes, the man had no choice but to plead guilty. In addition to being left in ruins, Jo Hoon-seok was now an outcast. His enemy was still alive, and the hitman he had hired was nowhere to be found. Things had taken an unexpected turn for the worse. For that reason, the criminal's options became limited. Jo Hoon-seok planned to disappear for a while until things calmed down. However, as he was on his way to a safe place, a red light appeared and a motorcycle emerged from behind. The man turned to see who was next to his left ear, only to find metal breaking the glass near him. With that, the color red appeared. The seats were stained with blood. After carrying out his orders, the killer decided to return to base. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the vigilante captain was clinging to life. At that moment, his subordinate entered with the requested object. It was a top-quality elixir created by the Mirani Company. The master demanded it immediately. Without wasting time, he took the sphere and consumed it. And so, his veins were purified of the poison. The master expected nothing less from something so expensive. But it was then that something inside him suddenly broke. And so, the one who was suffering began to curse Kim Tae-ju once again. As the company grew, its owner realized they needed more drugs, so he went to the heart of the mountain to obtain the gallbladder of the giant moon bear. In addition to drugs, he needed to consume new poisons to improve his martial arts. After consuming an immeasurable amount of deer venom, he who had reached the 4th star not long ago was now close to reaching the 5th. Only then did he notice something intriguing. Our hero had found the poisonous sap tree that produces a toxic substance to keep pests away. That strong, toxic substance had a surprisingly sweet taste. Tae-ju continued. Then he encountered a blue-bellied toad that stored venom in its entrails. Seeing that it had the same properties as anesthesia, he decided to keep it for research. Shortly after, he encountered a giant white wood centipede. The creature, which was as large as a snake, had venom potent enough to kill an orc with a single bite. The martial artist, in fact, found its powerful venom quite refreshing. At that moment, he noticed something in the distance. It was a kind of white symbol hidden among the bushes. Suddenly, the creature revealed itself. The giant moon bear had finally been located. The beast let out a fierce battle roar. Without expecting to encounter it so soon, he decided to test his power. The hero pulled out his flying daggers. He threw them all at the creature at once. The beast deflected them with great ease. Its speed was astonishing. The bear immediately charged at the human. Tae-ju quickly positioned himself behind it and launched a counterattack. At first, it seemed he had landed a direct hit, but the giant moon bear only had to flex its back muscles to expel the knives. Then Tae-ju decided to strike it with his blood-seal venomous palm. The beast remained unfazed and kept attacking relentlessly. Its claws tore through wood like butter. The hero decided to activate another skill to overcome it. And still, all his attacks proved ineffective. This enemy was tougher than anticipated, which meant it would be a challenge to defeat it while alone at the 4th star. Therefore, only one solution remained. Tae-ju needed to gain more power immediately. He pulled out the blue-bellied toad and decided to consume it right away. The centipede followed shortly after. As the venom filled his veins, our hero only had to convert it into venom essence. The process was completed quickly, and thus, the poison martial artist finally reached the 5th star. The difficulty of the challenge had now changed. Tae-ju wanted to use a new toy from the Poison Clan's arsenal, the blood butterflies. The metal insects quickly launched themselves at the bear. This hidden art could only be used after reaching the 5th star, as it allowed the user to control the trajectory of their projectiles. For that reason, he easily managed to hit the bear in the eye as well as its left ear. With that, the fight came to an end. Thus, Tae-ju was able to eliminate his target and reach a new level at the same time. With that done, he decided to claim his prize. The hero plunged his hand deep into the monster's entrails and finally acquired the organ he so desired. The bear's gallbladder was full of powerful venom and needed to be coated with energy for proper extraction. So our hero did exactly that. Now, with the necessary ingredient in hand, Kim Tae-ju could finally prepare a new elixir.